at the very beginning of your career, you're trying to really just stand out because you don't have any experience. So a lot of the times you don't get judged on experience. You get judged on culture fit, you get judged on potential, and they're really looking for just like, do I want to work with this person? Welcome to How to Survive Your Boss, the only podcast that spills tea on toxic workplaces, nightmare bosses, and the unspoken rules of corporate survival. I'm your host, Kiana, and in season 1, we're breaking down the key milestones in your relationship with your boss. Because let's be real, you don't know what you don't know. From interviews to promotions to that moment you realize your boss might actually be your worst nightmare, we're here to help you see the game before you get played. And I'm not doing it alone. This season, I'm joined by my little sis, Tara, who's heading off to college this year and recently started her journey into the world of corporate politics with her first part-time job last year. Together, we'll unpack things I wish I would have known, starting with today's topic, interviews, because surviving your boss starts before you even get the job. So let's get into it. Okay, little T, you ready to talk about interviews?
Sure I am.
Well, I guess we can start with some of the basics and just cover all of the different types of interviews. Because I know you've done one interview for your current part-time job, but
Yes.
there are many different types and structures and ways that people interview with companies. So the first thing is there's two types, really. You have structured interview, which are really predefined questions. It's very formal. It's Q&A in a sense, and it's pretty common when you're looking for like corporate roles or government roles. Then you have unstructured interviews. This is going to be more common in startups or in creative industries. There's less set questions, there's more flexibility, and it's a little bit more of a discussion. But in general, as you get more senior, interviews become more challenging. And they may even ask you down the line for test tasks or proof of work or even portfolios. So right now, you're kind of in the beginning, so you don't necessarily have a portfolio to share. But over time, you gain a lot more experience and there's more to kind of discuss. So typically, an interview process starts with, of course, the application submission. So this is where you submit a resume, a cover letter, and in some cases, a portfolio. Maybe if you're a creative student in college, sometimes you can use some of your projects. Even as a business student, you can use projects sometimes. It does just depend on the type of job. Then there's going to be
What is that?
Projects as in, good question. So projects as in like, so for example, in college, usually if you're in a course, I don't know, I'm trying to think of pretty much all courses are going to have group work or group projects. Some of them might be to develop a business idea and build a business plan around a business idea.
More specific to like the job you're applying for, which is like
Right.
Okay, I get it. I was saying, yeah.
I mean, honestly, like the whole project thing, let's be realistic here. When you're applying for a job and you're fresh out of school, you have nothing typically.
Yeah.
If you're applying for like an accounting job, for example, and all of your work experience is being a waiter or a bar server or something like that,
Not much.
then obviously it's not going to make any sense for the job.
Yeah.
And at the very beginning of your career, you're trying to really just stand out because you don't have any experience. So a lot of the times you don't get judged on experience. You get judged on culture fit. You get judged on potential. And they're really looking for just like, do I want to work with this person? And so sometimes those projects can help companies understand that you have more potential than others just because you've kind of done work that is similar to the work you might be doing
You're
in the
in
role.
the environment. Okay. All right.
So to just recap, so just to give you a sense of like interview processes, and as I mentioned, the more senior you become, the more intense these processes become. But Once you've submitted your application, you're typically going to have a screening. This happens internally. You don't see this. These days, it's often automated by AI too. So that makes things even more challenging, especially when you're looking for really competitive jobs.
Mm-hmm.
But internal screenings can really give you a sense of, at least within a company, right? They're supposed to give you a sense of like, is there any fit for this person? Typically, what it's called is an applicant tracking system. And it's like a big guy like Amazon, for example, they use an
Mm-hmm.
applicant tracking system because so many people apply to their jobs. So many people.
Mm-hmm.
And so they use this system and they use AI to essentially say, here are certain keywords that you should look for in the resume. Here are certain qualifications that we look for. If you're hiring, for example, for an international role, then you
Mm-hmm.
might look for somebody who speaks that language. And so
Yeah.
you're going to look for that in the resumes. And these tracking systems, I think they're a double-edged sword. Depends on, how companies use them. A
Yeah.
story came out, I can't remember what it was, but there was a story a couple years ago, I think, where a manager was having a hard time filling a role. And
Mm-hmm.
so to prove a point, he submitted his own resume to the tracking system and he got immediately rejected. The manager that clearly
Whoa.
has all of the qualifications, that clearly has
Yeah.
everything he needs for the job, he was
Yeah.
rejected. And so he brought that to his leadership team and was kind of,
Mm-hmm.
hey, WTF, I literally am the one hiring for this role. How am I not the one, getting moved
Qualified.
on to the next role or like the next phase
Yeah.
of this process?
Yeah.
And then it came to find out that I think the HR team had like mistyped keywords or certain filters. So they put certain filters, I think it was for like a software that doesn't exist anymore or something like that, that they were requiring the resumes to have. And anyway, so
Yeah.
they had been eliminating every single qualified candidate because it wasn't set up correctly.
Mm.
So the reality is applicant tracking systems, to know thy enemy, it's good, it's bad. It's helpful in some cases. It's also a double-edged sword. So I think that's why when you're in school, or at least when you're starting to apply for jobs, a lot of the advice is around catering your application to specific roles and making
Mm-hmm.
sure that you are, at least to some degree, having some of the similar language that's on the job description and using that for yourself in your own
Mm-hmm.
resume. So,
Mm-hmm.
internal screening, let's say you make it past that and the system gives you a green light. Then you'll typically have a phone screening call with an HR person. This
Mm-hmm.
is usually just to, one, confirm that you're a real human and you're still interested in the job.
Mm-hmm.
Because sometimes these processes can take a while. You can apply and not hear back from a company for a month. I mean, unfortunately, in today's market, you can also apply and never hear back from a company. That's pretty common too. So, you get this phone screening. They're typically short calls. A lot of the times they're just going to ask you general questions like where you live or, what work you're interested in or some
Mm-hmm.
cultural questions, really just kind of getting a feel for who you are as a candidate.
Yeah.
Then you typically move on to an interview with your hiring manager. Now, this isn't a guaranteed path to keep in mind. It does vary by role. But if you're talking with a hiring manager, this is really where the first interview comes into play.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to focus on a couple different things. It does depend on the job. Let's say it's an internship. With an internship, they're going to ask you questions that are about some of your technical skills. Obviously, you don't have any experience. So they're going to ask you more questions around, what projects you did at school,
Mm-hmm.
what you learned at school.
Yeah.
When I was in college, I used to put the actual classes I was taking on my resume because that would help me stand out from other candidates for
Yeah.
different internships.
Yeah.
Just because like I would take, I was going for marketing jobs, so I would take marketing seminar, marketing business practices, things like that, and
Yeah.
it just makes me look better
Yeah.
even though I don't have any direct experience in marketing. And then typically this is where your process will stop. Now, sometimes there might be another interview, maybe if, let's say it's a very competitive internship or a very competitive job, and so they want you to meet with your manager's manager just so that they have
Mm-hmm.
a little oversight and a little more discussion on like who you are as a candidate.
Yeah.
And those typically can be similar fashion to like the manager one, where they're going to ask a little some technical questions, get a sense of your background, get a sense of what you're capable of, and then really just like get a feel for, do they want to work with you? An
Yeah.
interview is all about, do I want to work with this person? And it is definitely a two-way conversation.
Yeah.
And then once you have your final interview, then it's reference checks, background screenings, maybe any of those like basic check boxes. And then, of
Yeah.
course, you get into the offer and negotiation. So sometimes you'll initially get a verbal offer. They'll be really excited. They'll call you. They'll say, hey, you got the job. This
Yeah.
is how much you're going to offer, yada, yada, yada. And it's very critical. I think the one piece of advice I can give is when you get an offer, always take time to consider and never immediately accept.
Mm-hmm.
And this is just because this is for a multitude of reasons. But one of the reasons is it's standard business practice to take time to
Yeah.
think about a decision,
Yeah.
right? Although it's great to get an offer, although it's great to have all of those pieces, it's so critical to have time. And part of it isn't even like you can have decided, like, I definitely want this job and I have zero intentions of not taking it,
Mhm.
but make them wait, right?
So, but
You
like,
waited patiently.
is there like a chance that if you take that time, like to, make them want you for X amount of
Mm-hmm.
reasons, like, could they give that position to somebody else if you take too
I
much time?
So standard practice is 1 day. If you
Hmm.
take more than a day, then yes. I mean, I would say like taking the night to sleep on it and think on it. Part of it is like you may not even see the email right away, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Taking a couple hours even is like totally fine. But typical practice is 1 business day
So
before you
don't
make a
wait too long.
decision, and you should. So don't wait too long. Definitely don't wait
Okay.
too long.
Okay.
Definitely also make sure that you're taking time to negotiate. In the beginning of your career, you have less negotiation room just because it's usually like hourly rates. It's not as, catered to your experience. But as
Yeah.
you gain some experience, even if you're, one internship of experience is all you have, it's really critical to take the time to negotiate. I remember my first job out of school and I was negotiating my salary and I was taking a walk with my boss at the time, my manager at the time,
Mhm.
and he made my offer. It was 65K. So I think it was 60K actually. It was 60K. And obviously it's an awkward conversation to say, give me more
Yeah.
in lame
Yeah.
terms. But you must do it. Obviously, they're going to say no, right? But maybe they're not. Maybe they're not. The worst case scenario is they say no. So I remember we were taking a walk. He made me my offer. And I asked him, I was like, okay, well, I have to ask, can you do better?
Hmm.
And his response was, I'm really glad you asked. Yes, we'll give you 65K. And I got
Wow.
5K right there just from asking
Asking. Yeah.
if they could do better.
Yeah.
And that was my first job out of college. There was really, I mean, there was some experience there because I interned at the company before, so they knew I was a good candidate. But like at the
Hmm.
same time, obviously, it was 60K. It was a pretty standard offer for a marketing job when you get out of school. Like I wasn't sure, but it never hurts to ask.
Never. Yeah.
So I think that's key. So that's the process in a sense to give you an idea of like what it looks like, what it's
Yeah.
going to be like when you get in
Yeah.
the door. And I think we can now start talking about just a couple of common styles of interviews. So you have the phone interview. I already mentioned that. That's,
Hmm.
your screening, you get a phone call. This is pretty common for initial conversations, less common for actual interviews. I would
Hmm.
say typically interviews today are one on one through Zoom, like most commonly. Sometimes they are in person. It is always great when they're in person, But if you live far away, if your school schedule makes it challenging, if any of those things
Yeah.
come in the way, then typically they're going to default to a Zoom.
Yeah.
There are also panel interviews. So panel interviews, I did one of these once. It's when there's multiple people in the interview and they all ask you questions as the interview goes. So I think
Like rapid
I've had a
fire?
couple panel interviews. Not rapid fire. Not
They give
necessarily
you a
rapid fire,
minute to
but
breathe?
they do give you, I mean, they're going to take time. It depends. I
That's
mean, if a
awful.
company is very formal, right?
Yeah.
It's unlikely that there's going to be a ton of questions and it's going to be this stuff. A panel interview for an internship is, I wouldn't say it's common just because an internship's such a short time role. You have very
Yeah.
little experience. There's not too many
Yeah.
questions. But a lot of the times, panel interviews are really just so that people can get like multiple people sit in the room, they have different perspectives. Let's say
Yeah.
you're an executive and you're going for an executive position, you might see somebody from multiple different departments joining a panel interview just because you need to be able to, answer questions from different POVs. So that's
Yeah.
something that's a little more common. Um then you have like more behavioral interviews. So these are stress test interviews. I can't remember what company it was. I'll have to try to find it, but it was like there was a car company that did these crazy behavioral interviews where they would intentionally have the manager act crazy or like have somebody run into the interview room and do something insane like throw
Whoa.
money or throw a chair. And they would do that just to see how somebody would react, right?
Uh-huh.
So they would create this like stress test environment and they would do all of it just to kind of get into someone's psyche and see what they do if they shut down, if they freak
Oh.
out, if they try to fight, or any of these things. And so that's a more of a behavioral interview. Those are I've yet
What
to
would
have
be a
one of
good
those happen to
reaction to
me.
that? Is there
Yeah,
a good
I've not
reaction
had
to
that
have?
happen. I mean, I don't know. The I don't think these are very common, I will say. I know the company that did it kind of as like a funny thing. They made a
Mhm.
commercial out of it.
Oh, okay.
Um yeah, but I think the best way to react is always trying to keep a certain level of professionalism
Yes. Yeah.
and making sure that you let the interviewer take the lead, right? So if the interviewer is freaking out, then perhaps you should freak out. But in these interviews, right, the interviewer knew something was going to
Knows.
come, knew
Yeah.
something was
Yeah.
going to happen. So if you follow their lead, it's definitely going to be a little bit safer.
Yeah.
Then, next type of interviews, you have technical interviews. Technical interviews get really in the weeds. I think for beginning jobs, this isn't very common, but sometimes it can be, right? Like perhaps if you're going into an engineering job, they might have you do like a snippet of code for them that they want to see that you're able to produce kind of whatever it is that's relevant to the
Hands
job.
on.
I've
Mhm.
done I've had technical interviews before where you ask, I worked in ad tech. I work in
Mhm.
ad tech and
Yeah.
you interview people using like specific terms and do you know Google Ads? Okay,
Yeah.
what do you do in Google Ads? Give me an example of features that you really like. And that's really technical. So it's hard to kind of bluff those situations if you
Yeah.
know absolutely nothing about it.
Yeah.
So technical interviews, those are common. I wouldn't say super common for internships or beginning roles, but definitely once you start getting experience, you're going to see a lot more technical interviews.
Yeah.
Next thing, you have group interviews. This is where I've never seen this before, but while I was doing research, it listed it as a type. So it's still out there. And it's basically where you just have multiple candidates being interviewed simultaneously. I don't really know how that works. I've yet to see that happen, but I think I can imagine maybe this is a similar concept to like auditioning for a role and
Oh,
having people do chemistry tests and things like that. I don't know. I've yet to see it
interesting.
in a corporate setting, at least from the perspective of like having two candidates that are close to getting a job in the same space,
Yeah.
interviewing with the same questions and seeing
Yeah.
how their competition is performing.
Yeah.
But it's definitely there. And then, of course, you have, I think, something that's been really starting to grow in popularity is pre recorded interviews or like AI driven interviews. I've seen this a lot where companies will request like a short video introducing yourself, saying a little bit about your background, talking about a little bit of, why you want the job,
Yeah.
which is kind of an interview in the sense of you got to set up a camera, you got to record yourself, and you have to answer some
Yeah.
questions. So there's
Yeah.
definitely more of that these days than it used to be. And I'm sure we're going to see a lot more of that.
That's funny. I've done that
So
for
those are the
school.
kind. You've done that for school
I
already? For
I
what?
I did that. So it was for my pals class before we got a different teacher. It was like really strict, and you had to take a video of yourself and answer X amount of questions, and you had to submit it. So either you could be in the class or you could not be in the class. So it was very interesting. Very
Oh
stressful,
my
very
gosh.
awkward.
Okay. So then yeah, as I said, I've been seeing more of these like videos. There's like a app that specifically helps companies just like gather in videos and recruit people from this perspective. So I believe it. That's pretty great. I'm
It's just
glad you did that
that,
in high school
yeah,
though. It's
it
preparing
was
you.
crazy. It was weird because it was like they had a like anonymous, like teachers not from my school to review the videos, and I was like,
Mm.
sure, okay, this is
That makes
awesome.
sense. That makes sense because
But it was an
I mean, if it
easier
was
like
your own teachers,
topic.
they know you.
Yeah, it was an easier topic
Mm.
since it was more like, leadership and like about like more children prioritize like how you are around kids, like what are your interests, and you obviously want to be a little more on the childish side because that's your a peer to elementary kids and middle school
But before
kids.
you keep talking, little T, can you explain what PALS is?
So PALS is a leadership group. I don't know like the like PALS, like I don't know what it stands for, but I know it has leadership in the name. So basically, I've done
All
this now
right.
for 2 years. It's awesome. I love PALS. You go and you have one-on-one time with a specific child who may have like at home problems, or maybe they have lots of siblings and they don't get the most attention and they're kind of feeling left out and they don't kind of fit in. So our job
Mm.
is to come and be there for them and be there with them so they have someone to talk to, do things with. You're kind of just like that older sibling that they kind of want or
Got
they
it.
need. So
Ah,
it's
yes,
just,
because not
yeah.
everybody has me.
Facts.
That makes sense. Okay, well, that's very helpful, little T. I guess we can start talking about questions and preparing for an interview because I think there are a lot of questions, there are a lot of methodologies, but most interviews have some of the same mechanisms. So, the one thing I
Mhm.
always tell everyone that I mentor is getting a really good elevator pitch or summary of yourself because you will almost always be asked, tell me a little bit about yourself. That is almost, I would say, how every single interview will start when you meet a
The worst
manager,
question.
a director. Yeah, it's a bit of a, it's an open question, but the way somebody answers this question can be so telling, right? Just
Yeah.
because it gives a sense of, how prepared somebody is, how ready somebody is to discuss these things, and more importantly, I think it's your one time where you can really just brag about yourself or you can say anything you
Yeah.
want. So,
Which is
I always
hard for people.
yeah, it's hard for most people, I think, unless you're maybe a little crazy. But I always advise people to think of a kind of anecdote, a fun way to make sure people remember you and they don't forget you. And part of that
Yes,
is
we talked about
because,
this
yeah, we did talk about this, I think.
for my
Part of,
interview.
yeah, I think, well, so it depends on who you're talking to when you get answered this
Yeah.
question. But imagining from the boss's side, right? They maybe have interviewed 5 people that day, 10 people that day. If it's
Yeah.
somebody in HR, probably more than that. And so you want to, one, say a little bit about yourself. Oh, my name's Kiana. I love marketing. I love business, blah, 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 blah. That makes me sound smart. but then you also want to throw in something that's very memorable to you. So when I was fresh out of college, I used to say, oh, and I was raised in a traditional Japanese business family, but I grew up in Texas, and so I might say y'all, and there's no reason to get, weirded out by it. And it was just like a dumb joke. It was just a very stupid joke.
Just something
But
to, yeah.
it lightened the mood always. I think in today's current political climate, when you are diverse, when you are a person of color, sometimes people can be a little hesitant because they don't want to offend you. And so this wasn't a like
Yeah.
open door, offend me all the time, but this was a, hey,
Yeah.
I can make light of being this Japanese Texan that says y'all, and the more I hang out with,
Facts. Yeah.
Southern people, the more my twang comes out, and I can be honest about it. So I think that's one. Nowadays, I absolutely plug Dr. Scholl's pretty much always.
Here we go.
This was not sponsored by Dr. Scholl's, but hopefully one day this pod will be
Love Dr.
sponsored.
Scholl's.
Yeah, Dr. Scholl's shoes. I always bring that up. Everybody remembers me when I bring up because who talks about Dr. Scholl's shoes? Nobody.
My sister.
Absolutely. It's the untapped market, little T, okay?
And you put me on too, making me wear them to work.
Change your life. I need a referral code. All right, we're going to work on that before the next episode. I'm just going to keep exclusively plugging Dr. Scholl's until they acknowledge me.
Perfect.
Okay. Continuing on here. So, some other general questions you might have is they might ask you to walk you through their resume. Part of that, sometimes if they ask that question, it is absolutely because they did not read your resume. The hiring managers oftentimes do not do as much due diligence as HR. So instead of me trying to read this piece of paper, I'm going to give you 3 minutes for you to tell me everything that's on this piece of paper that I should care about. So it's very important for you to know what's on your resume when you apply because those questions might come through.
Yeah.
And then you got some other type of questions. So there's behavioral questions, which typically, I don't know if you've ever heard of the STAR method, little T. It's an interview question answering method where basically you break down each element of the answer into 4 buckets. So you have the situation, where you briefly describe the context or the background of the situation. Then you have the task. So this is whatever specific task or goal that you were responsible for. Then you describe the actions. So here's the actions you took to address this situation or to achieve the results you wanted. And then the last piece is, of course, the results, which is here was the outcome of your actions and here's what I learned from your experience. So to give you an example of this, there is a question such as, tell me about a time you faced a challenge at work. How did you handle it? So if we're using the STAR situation, right? Give me a situation.
I can
think of all your crusty customers. Come on, you've got this.
What, you want to talk about the coupons?
Yeah, let's talk about the coupons.
Customers handed me expired coupons.
Okay. So that
and then complaining and making me honor it anyway, even though they're very expired.
Okay. So the situation is you had customers that would come in with expired coupons demanding that you accept them, right? The task.
Yes.
What was the specific task goal you're responsible for? You were responsible for checking out the customer, right? And helping them get their products. Then what actions you took? Well, from what I remember from your stories, you would always call your manager and have your manager assist you in explaining to them that the coupons are expired.
Well, I will always point out the fact, because it very clearly says the date on all of our coupons, whether they are on paper or on the phone. I will always explain. They usually don't care about my explanation, which is fine. I get it. So, because, we have a mom who's also like this.
Yes.
So at that point, I'm just like, okay, how about we bring in the big boss, the store manager? And the store manager usually almost always honors their coupon because it is not worth the time to waste.
Fair enough. And so then the result is you have a happy customer because they got their coupon used and all of
Exactly.
these things. Now, some feedback on this
Yes.
answer, because let's
Yes.
imagine we were in an interview, right? If I was a
Mm-hmm.
manager
Mm-hmm.
interpreting this situation, there's a couple things. One, you don't necessarily show independence, right? Like you had to bubble it up to the manager.
Yes.
Obviously, that's standard practice
Yes.
when you're working in a retail store, but something to note is what other situations existed while you were at work that really just showed you
Mm-hmm.
took care of business by yourself. So while you think of examples, and we don't need to go through them now, but as you think of future examples, right? We need to
Mm-hmm.
base things for the interview, certain accomplishments that are really rooted in I did this, this is something that, you would want me to work for you with, right? Also, the
Mm-hmm.
result. In this case, luckily, there's a happy customer. They get their coupon. It makes it a little easier. But there is also the instance where the result could be, an unhappy customer. And you don't want to use those. Obviously, when we're talking about results, we always want to try to think of positive situations. And in any scenario where possible, we want to try to use numbers. So saying something
Mm-hmm.
like, I had all of these coupon ladies coming in with all of their crazy coupons that were super expired, right? I was
Yeah.
responsible for checking them out, right? The actions I took
Yes.
was I explained to them that these coupons were expired. However, we also had coupons that were recently given out, and I was able to apply one of those. Although it wasn't the same discount, I was able to give the customer a partial discount, and they ended up
Yes.
leaving very happy. They got all their soaps and everybody was, in good news. That situation is obviously going to give a manager a little bit more confidence in what you're able to handle on your
Yeah.
own,
Hiring.
right? It's like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, I want to hire this
Yeah.
person because they're going to be able to take care of business and they know how to get creative when it comes to the crazy coupon ladies. Okay, behavioral questions using the STAR method, definitely something to keep in mind. Companies like Google, for example, expect you to use the STAR method for every question. And typically, the best way to practice for some of those interviews is on your resume, you typically outline accomplishments and things you've done. And so for each of those things, you start to outline what the STAR method is before you go into the interview. And that's kind of how you can prepare. Okay,
Mm.
then you have situational questions. I think you had a lot of these when you were applying for some of these jobs. I remember where it was like, how would you handle a
Yes.
situation when a customer is
Yes.
unhappy?
Yes.
Or,
Yes. Lots of these, and they are very real situations. And a lot of these questions are very real life, and you would not expect it until it actually happens. You're like, wow, okay.
exactly. And so I think when it comes to situational questions in the hypothetical scenarios, it's best to think about what would make the most sense and create the least amount of effort from my manager, because everything is about your manager in a
Yes.
sense, right? The
Yes.
reason why this
Yes.
podcast is called How to Survive Your Boss is because if you do not make your boss happy, nothing else matters. So what would that manager
Isn't
want,
that?
right? Well, that manager wants a worker that is not going to create more work for them. That is very critical. So I think answering those situational questions with that in mind can definitely give you a leg up. The next one is more technical or job specific questions. This does vary, right? In the beginning of your career, when you're an intern, there's not too many technical questions you can ask because, frankly, interns know nothing. They don't really know the
Mm-hmm.
industry yet. And although college teaches you many things, it teaches you the best of the best practices, especially in business. And when you get into the real world, you quickly learn that most companies do not use those best of best practices. And most companies, you got to relearn everything in the sense on the job.
Yeah.
For engineers, let's say, they might ask you to walk them through a coding problem that you've solved before. This is just going to help them see how you think through code, how you think through problem solving, and gives them a sense of how you'll do on a job. Or let's say you're a finance person. One of my friends was doing an interview and they jumped on the interview. He handed him a financial report, like a fake financial report. And he said, okay, I'm going to come back in 20 minutes, analyze this report, and give me what you think about this data. And he left the guy for 20 minutes, left him with the report, and he came back. And it wasn't that there's like a perfect answer. It's more about seeing how you think, seeing how you go through the work, seeing what, where your mind takes you. So I don't know about dentistry. I don't know if they do that, Lil T, but we'll have to investigate that as we keep going. Then almost always you're going to have some form of a cultural fit or personality questions that are baked in somewhere in the interview, whether it's by your manager or by the HR team or by the director. Somebody is going to ask you questions that give them a sense of, are you a culture fit for this company? Does it make sense for us to work together? And more importantly, like, do I want to work with you? That is the number one question that we are trying to answer, right? So, for example, they might ask you, how do you handle constructive criticism? And some people don't handle criticism well at all. Some people are very bad at handling criticism. So if you work in a really intense corporate environment where people are really aggressive and people are very, very, very critical, answering this question can give them a sense of, will you be able to cut it? So for example, if you're starting out at a law firm, that is cutthroat. A corporate law firm is cutthroat. It's the wild, wild west. It's every man for themselves in a sense. And there's a lot of critical feedback. There's a lot of aggressive feedback. Honestly, someone may even call you stupid. That's how intense it can be. So if you can't handle the heat or the smoke, as they say, do not enter such a work environment, right? And
so should I be answering this question honestly, or should I, kind of just put a little lie on it? Because I definitely lied when they asked me.
Yeah, I mean, let's be realistic here, right? Like, one of my favorite quotes that I don't even know who said it, but I heard it before, is that an interview is just two people coming to the table to lie to each other, and that is exactly what it is.
Yes, you told me that. Yes.
Yeah, of course there is an element of lying within all of this. I do think it is also, however, equally important for you to pay attention to some of those questions and to pay attention to what you could be getting yourself into, because it is your career. It is your mental health. It is your life. You don't want to just lie to get the job, and then you get a really shitty job and you have a really shitty boss and you're miserable for 5 years, right? You just want to avoid that. So there's a balance, shall we say, to lying in an interview.
Yeah.
And I think when it comes to the culture questions, this is where you want to be maybe a little more honest, right? But also some of these are so fluffy, right? Like, companies think they're gods. And when you're talking with an interviewer, they drink the juice, as I say. So if the company's culture is to be hard workers, then they're going to come onto this interview and be like, are you a hard worker? And it's like, well, sure, yeah, duh. Like, I'm pretty freaking hard at working. Sure, that makes sense. Right? But at the same time, it's also like, just keep in mind that the company asking you all of these questions about being a hard worker likely means that once you get into the job, it will indeed require hard work.
Yeah. I don't even remember. I remember when we researched for my job and we looked up the culture, and we did a whole thing. We had the whole setup because, I have a professional here and I'm going in for my little retail job. I have like questions to ask after the interview's over. I know everything to say step by step by step. We looked up the culture. I know everything about this place. This guy, he's like, asking me the questions and I'm just rapid firing answering. It's like I've been studying up, and he's just like, all right. All right. He's a little intimidated, bro. Got that corporate on my side. Got
He
the
said,
little
"How do you
CEO.
know? How do you know our corporate culture quotes?" And I don't know our corporate culture quotes. Well,
Literally.
listen, that's so critical. Honestly, like looking up a company, taking the time to know their background is going to make all the difference when you interview because most people
Yeah.
won't do
It
it,
was very, very helpful. Very helpful.
right?
Even the littlest retail job, like it was very important.
Yeah, exactly. So we'll get into it later, but more advice to come on looking up the company before you get into the interview. The next one is you're going to have some problem solving or analytical questions. Now, this is typically more for consulting type roles. Like they might give you
Mhm.
puzzle
Mhm.
type questions. How many tennis balls can fit in a school bus is an example of a question that they might give you for critical thinking and analytical test, right? And it's not about getting a
Mhm.
right answer. What it's about is, okay, walk me through how you do the math of putting tennis balls in a bus. And so if I'm a consultant, I'm going to go, okay, a tennis ball is probably about 3 inches long, right? A school bus is
Mhm.
probably about 15 feet long by 15 by maybe,
Yeah.
I don't know, probably it's probably more than that. It's probably, well, I guess that's a short bus. I would first ask the clarifying question, is it a short or long bus? Then I would get into how long said bus is. But do the math, 15 feet by 10 feet, and then you can do the math of, how many 3-inch tennis balls, 3-inch by 2-inch tennis balls fit into such a space. That's really, they're not looking for, oh, the correct answer is 50,000 tennis balls. They're looking for your thought process in getting there and how you kind of
Bro,
go
I
about
wouldn't
solving
even
those
have a
questions.
thought process. I'd just be
Well,
like
you don't want to
a
be a
lot of tennis
consultant, so
balls
I
could
think
probably
it's
fit into a
okay.
bus.
Yeah, you
This
want to
is
be a
true.
dentist. So I think unless somebody asks you how many teeth are in a mouth and how many can you extract, I think you're going to be okay, little T. The
Probably
next
all of
one,
them.
okay. All right. All right. The next type of questions are usually about salary and expectations. This is not going to happen in a retail job. This is also not going to happen in an internship. Typically, internships are set salaries. This is really only going to get into play once you go for a full time role. But you will almost
Mhm.
always be asked by somebody. It may not be the hiring manager, it may be during the screening, it may be by the director. What are your salary
Mhm.
expectations? And this is a tricky question to answer because, frankly, most companies, dependent on state, do not publish how much a job makes, right? They don't put on the
Mhm.
roll. Now, certain states like Colorado and New York, where I'm at, they require by law for companies to publish the salary range of each role. Now, of course, in classic fashion, a
Hmm.
lot of companies are dickheads, and what they do is they provide these egregiously large salary ranges where somebody in a position could make anywhere from 30K to 150K, which is a crazy range to try to assess. So, the best
Yeah.
way to handle these questions, at least this is how I handle these questions, is number one, you need to know a general idea of how much this job makes. And the best way to do that, there's a couple ways.
Mhm.
One is Glassdoor. Glassdoor is always going to be a trusted friend in the sense of people go on Glassdoor, they share their salaries. If it's a large company that you're applying for, it's very likely you're going to be able to look up how much that salary is for that business. But then you also
Mhm.
have other options
Mhm.
like looking at other roles that are similar titles, similar positions, and similar jobs that do have published salary ranges. So let's say you're talking to
Yeah.
Amazon, you might look at what Google's jobs are being paid if it wasn't published or if it wasn't there. The
Yeah.
other thing to keep in mind is different companies have different salary structures internally. When you're at small companies, there is a lot of flexibility and they kind of make it up as they go in
Mhm.
a sense based on their budgets. Versus if you're at a large company like FedEx or one of these massive
Mhm.
Fortune 100 businesses, They typically have preset levels where you can be a level 1 employee. So for example, at Amazon, I'm pretty sure level 1 employees are like warehouse workers. And then level 2 is the managers. And then once you're at level 3 and level 4, you start to get into corporate roles. And once you get at level
Yeah.
7, now you're a director. And so each of
Yeah.
those levels has their own pay range. And a little fun fact for you is you can have a higher salary being in a lower level than somebody at a higher level.
Mhm.
It all just depends on the type of job, right? So an engineer who's a level 5 is probably getting paid more
Mhm.
than a level 6 person that's in some other
Yeah.
department that isn't an engineer. So it just depends on certain things, but
Yeah.
the biggest thing is look up the job before. If they don't have the salary immediately there, get creative, use Glassdoor to see if other people have posted about it. Or, of course, use other positions from other companies and competitors that have similar ranges. Because then, when you get asked this question, what is your salary expectation? You can answer with confidence,
Mhm.
well, based on the role and the description of the job, I understand the
Mhm.
typical market rate for a job like this is 75,000. However, because I come to the table with additional experience or I have even more qualifications and I believe that I am more senior for this job, I would like 77K. And then they'll take that
Mhm.
and and then you get into negotiations and then you get into all of these other things, you know, benefits and so forth. But in a general sense, that's the best way.
I do have a question
Yeah, get in it.
because obviously, no, we don't have salaries as just like retail or like industry, but they do ask how much are you like expecting on the hourly rate,
Yeah.
but they never bring it up in the interview. They never ask. And I'm just kind of curious, why do they even bother to put the question if we're not going to talk about it? If it's going to just already have a set pay, then what's the point of asking me, how much do I want to be paid?
It's a good question, little T.
Obviously, I
Uh,
want more than what you're giving me, but
yeah, so I
you're
think
not going to talk to me about it.
yeah, I think well, part of it is really like they're always going to ask you what you want your salary to be because they want you to start the conversation. To your point, they're not going to bring it up sometimes because there's no negotiation room. That's a lot of times where it's like for especially in a job like you have, like a part-time. I mean, you got your job as a seasonal worker, right? So it
Yeah,
you have
yeah,
very little negotiation power here because you don't have any like you have no experience really, right? It's a pretty
yeah,
basic job in the sense of anyone can do it with a certain level
yeah,
of
yeah.
basic social skills and
Oh,
so
yeah.
forth, right? And so because of that, there's so many people who can fit the role. If you
Hmm.
don't have a salary range that they're willing to accommodate, they'll just delete you from the pile. And that's why they ask. As I mentioned, that
Oof.
applicant tracking system is an enemy and a friend. And if you answer, let's say it's the role says it's $15 an hour, and you put in your hourly expected range that you want $18 an hour. If I was the
Mhm.
HR person, I would be like, why the hell did you apply? It clearly says $15 an hour, right? Like, why are you
Yeah,
wasting my
yeah.
time telling me you want more than I
Well,
can give
they
you?
didn't even. Do you remember when we were actually looking and they didn't actually tell me a number until I got hired?
Hmm. And part of
Like,
that,
they.
part of
Is it
that is just
mysterious?
because it might be mysterious. It also is about experience, right? So like if I had 10
Yeah.
years of experience in retail and I was coming in, I would probably ask
Oh,
for
you
slightly
want,
higher
like.
hourly rate, right?
Yeah,
Versus
this is
you,
true.
this was your first job ever. So, minimum wage is nice and you're above minimum
You
wage.
know what I realized? Maybe that's why none of the other places are calling me back.
I mean, little T,
Because for
yeah,
the hourly,
it's
I'm just like, honestly, I don't know. Like, what? It doesn't tell me a set price. How am I supposed to know how much you're going to pay me? I honestly could care less. Money's
right.
money, but
So,
like, yeah, it'd be nice to have 18 bucks an hour. Yeah.
so this is where we get into back to the advice. Go to Glassdoor, look at other similar roles. Let's figure out how much somebody else is making, and then we make our judgment. We answer the questions based off that.
You think they do that for my type of jobs? They'll put those
Yeah,
on
absolutely.
Glassdoor?
Oh my god. Oh my god.
Really?
Oh yeah. Oh, I bet you. The best way to learn about a company sometimes is their Glassdoor. I used to tell so being in advertising, right? Agencies have so much
Mhm.
turnover. I mean, most of them don't work very well, but anyways, the best way to learn about some of these companies is Glassdoor because people are ruthless sometimes. And according to Glassdoor, they do not delete reviews. I have personally watched my old company, or an old company I worked at, I should say, because it wasn't mine, delete Glassdoor reviews. So I don't know who to trust. Honestly, in the corporate world, don't trust anyone.
Oh,
Everyone's lying. Just start with a soft, like
thanks.
just assume no trust, but work towards it, right? Do your research, get in there, and then I think just be prepared, right? So this, which brings me to the last version of questions, which is the reverse interview questions, aka you asking the interview questions and not them asking you questions. And this is really important because one, just like you said, when you researched online all of these different cultural elements of this company, you learned so much about this business, you were able to go to this manager and ask him questions around, what the work schedule was going to look like, what the timing looks like. Like you had all of these questions. And ultimately, people love to talk. It is amazing if you can get the interviewer to talk because them just asking you questions and listening to your answer is such a boring conversation, right?
Yeah.
It's very
Yeah.
unrememberable, and frankly, people like talking a lot of the time. So when you give them an opportunity
Yeah.
to talk, it one gets them a little bit more invested in your interview process. Two, it's going to give them something to really remember a little bit more. And three, it gives you a chance to show you did your homework. So, a good
Yeah.
question that you can ask like all the time, right, is what will my role look like in 6 months from now? Like, let's say it's 6 months from now. What am I doing that
Mhm.
shows you made the right choice hiring me? Because here's why this question's so good. One, it makes them imagine hiring you, right? It puts them in the thought process
Yeah.
of, I hired this person. In 6 months from
Yeah.
now, what do I want this person in this job to be doing so that I know I made the right choice,
Yeah.
right? And it
That is a good
also,
question.
right? It's my favorite question to ask. And it's a
That's
good
that's a
question.
good question, bro.
It's I know, it's a good question for any scenario. Some of the other ones might be
Yeah.
is like you can ask them, how does the company support professional growth or how does the company support my growth? Now, hopefully you did your research. Hopefully you know if they have any programs. But if there isn't anything on their website, you can ask this question. Or maybe there was something on their website, like they say, oh, we have a mentorship program. Great. In the interview, you can ask them, can you tell me more about the professional development mentor program that your company runs? It sounds really interesting and I'd love to understand it more. That's getting them
Mhm.
realizing, like, oh, wow, they took the time to go to our website to read about all of this stuff we talk about and to really get a sense of why do I want to work for this company, right? It shows that you have a good answer.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are some other reverse interview questions that are a little bit more pointed towards identifying if it's a toxic workplace. For example, right? You
Uh-oh.
might ask, let's say if it's an internship, obviously this doesn't work, but if you're going for a full-time role, what you can ask
Mhm.
is, The person who previously filled my role, where could they have done better? Or why is
Oh,
this role reopened? Now, that question can tell you a lot,
oh.
right? Because obviously they can't sit here and be
Yeah,
like, oh, we fired that person or oh, that person was laid off. But it's a really good
yeah,
sign if they say, oh, well, the person in this role was promoted. And so that's why I have to hire somebody to do this job now because I was promoted and I'm the
yeah,
manager. That's a great sign.
yeah,
We love that. A bad sign. They dance around the answer. Oh, the previous person in this role just wasn't a culture fit. Oh, the previous person in this role didn't, anything along those lines that just don't sit right. Keep your eyes open for.
mhm,
Doesn't necessarily mean it's a bad company, right? Sometimes it really is true. People aren't a good fit, or it could even be they changed the job or they change the
yeah,
department. There's a lot of different answers to it, but you definitely don't want to just assume that people are kind of
yeah.
all put together.